Elena Moreau stood at the altar in a cathedral filled with Chicago's most dangerous men, her hand trembling as she reached for a groom who wasn't there. Dominic Falcone, the city's most feared mafia boss, had just done the unthinkable. He'd walked away, leaving her in front of 300 witnesses who would never let her forget it. The rejection wasn't an accident, it was a declaration, and it destroyed her life in seconds. But 3 months later, when war came for her family, the only man who could save her was the same man who'd shattered her world. Now he wanted marriage. Now he wanted her. And Elena had to decide: accept the protection of the man who'd made her a ghost, or die proving she didn't need him. If you want to see how Elena survives the world that tried to erase her, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning sun cut through the stained glass windows of Holy Name Cathedral, painting the white marble floors in fractured colors: red, gold, violet. Elena Moreau stood in the bridal suite on the cathedral's second floor, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror that had witnessed 100 weddings before hers. The dress was perfect. Vera Wang, custom-made, fitted to her body like it had been sewn onto her skin. Ivory silk, hand-beaded with crystals that caught the light with every breath. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her mother's diamond earrings glinting at her throat. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. She felt like a sacrifice being prepared for slaughter. "You're shaking," her sister Natalie said from behind her, adjusting the cathedral-length veil that pooled on the floor like spilled milk. "Elena, breathe." Elena tried. The breath caught in her chest, sharp and painful. "I'm fine." "You're terrified," Natalie corrected, her voice gentle but unflinching. She was 3 years younger, 22, to Elena's 25, but she'd always been the brave one, the one who said what no one else would. "And you have every right to be. Dominic Falcone isn't exactly known for his warmth." That was an understatement bordering on comedy. Dominic Falcone was known for 3 things: absolute control, lethal efficiency, and a complete absence of mercy. He ran the South Side with an iron fist, commanded an empire built on fear and precision, and had never, not once in the 15 years since he'd taken power at 23, shown weakness. Men twice his age stepped aside when he entered a room. Rival families whispered his name like a curse, and in 2 hours, Elena was supposed to marry him. "He's not cruel," Elena said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Father wouldn't have agreed to this if Dominic was—" "Father agreed because the alliance benefits him," Natalie interrupted, stepping around to face her. "This marriage secures the Northern Territories and ends the border conflicts. It's strategy, Elena, not romance." Elena knew that. She'd known it from the moment her father, Vincent Moreau, had sat her down in his study 3 months ago and explained the arrangement. The Moreau family controlled the North Side, shipping, imports, legitimate businesses that laundered enough money to keep the FBI busy for decades. The Falcone family controlled the South, construction, unions, enforcement. Together, they'd create an unbreakable alliance that would dominate Chicago's underworld for a generation. All it required was Elena's hand, her life, her future. "I'm not expecting romance," Elena said quietly, smoothing her hands over the dress. "I'm expecting survival." Natalie's expression softened. She reached out, squeezed Elena's hand. "Then survive, big sister. But don't let him make you small." Before Elena could respond, the door opened and their father stepped inside. Vincent Moreau was a man who commanded attention without effort. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He'd built an empire from nothing, clawed his way up from the docks to the penthouses, and he carried that history in every line of his face. "It's time," he said, his voice steady, unemotional. "The guests are seated. Dominic is waiting." Elena's stomach twisted. She forced herself to nod, to step away from the mirror, to take her father's offered arm. Natalie fussed with the veil one last time, then stepped back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you," Natalie whispered. Elena couldn't say it back. If she spoke, she'd shatter. The walk from the bridal suite to the cathedral's main entrance felt like a death march. Elena could hear the murmur of voices beyond the massive wooden doors, the shuffle of 300 guests settling into their seats. Chicago's criminal elite gathered to witness the merger of two dynasties. She recognized voices. Antonio Rizzo, who ran the gambling operations downtown. Marcus Chen, who controlled the docks. Sofia Catalano, the widow who'd inherited her husband's territory and tripled its value in 2 years. They were all here to watch her become Dominic Falcone's wife, to witness the contract being signed in flesh and vows. "Head up," Vincent murmured as they reached the doors. "You're a Moreau. Act like it." The doors swung open. The church fell silent. Elena forced herself to breathe, to move, to walk down the aisle on her father's arm as 300 people turned to watch. The cathedral was stunning, soaring ceilings, ornate columns, enough flowers to fill a garden, white roses and orchids everywhere, their scent almost overwhelming. A string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon in D, the notes echoing off the marble. And at the end of the aisle, standing at the altar in a black suit that fit him like armor, was Dominic Falcone. Elena had seen him before. Twice. Once at a charity gala 6 months ago, where he'd stood in a corner nursing a whiskey and watching the room like a predator deciding which prey to take down first. Once at the engagement dinner 3 months ago, where he'd shaken her hand with the warmth of a business transaction and discussed territory lines with her father, like she wasn't even there. But she'd never been this close, never had to look directly into those cold, calculating eyes. He was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, sharp, dangerous, perfectly crafted for a single purpose. Dark hair, severe features, a jawline that could cut glass. He stood utterly still, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression giving away nothing. No nervousness, no anticipation, no emotion whatsoever. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she walked toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last. The guests were a blur of faces, watching, judging, calculating what this marriage meant for their own positions in the hierarchy. When they reached the altar, Vincent placed Elena's hand in Dominic's. The touch was brief, impersonal. Dominic's hand was warm, his grip firm but not gentle. He looked at her father, nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of receipt, and then turned to face the priest. Elena stood beside him, her hand still in his, and felt like she was disappearing. The priest began. Father Michael O'Connor, who'd presided over mob weddings for 40 years and knew better than to ask questions about the couples who stood before him. His voice rolled through the cathedral, familiar words about love and commitment and faithfulness. Words that felt hollow when spoken over two people who'd barely exchanged sentences. "Marriage is a sacred bond," Father O'Connor intoned, "a union of two souls before witnesses and the eyes of heaven." Dominic's hand tightened on hers, just slightly, a pressure that might have been unconscious. Elena glanced at him. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, but something had shifted in his expression, something she couldn't name. "Do you, Dominic Michael Falcone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Father O'Connor asked. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." Silence. It stretched for 3 seconds. 5. 10. Dominic stood utterly still, his hand still gripping Elena's, his breathing shallow and controlled. The cathedral had gone so quiet, Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the rustle of fabric as guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Dominic?" Father O'Connor prompted gently. Dominic turned his head, looked at Elena, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd walked down the aisle. His eyes were dark, almost black in the cathedral's light. And for just a moment, one brief, devastating moment, she saw something flicker in them. Fear. Then he let go of her hand. "No," he said. The word landed like a gunshot. Elena actually flinched, her body reacting before her mind could process what he'd said. "I'm sorry," Dominic continued, his voice steady, clear, carrying through the cathedral so every single person could hear. "I can't do this." Father O'Connor went pale. "Dominic, perhaps we should—" "I can't marry her." Dominic took a step back from the altar, from Elena, his hands dropping to his sides. He looked at Vincent Moreau, who'd risen from his seat in the front pew, his face darkening with fury. "This alliance was a mistake. I won't go through with it." Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The cathedral spun around her, 300 faces blurring into a nightmare collage of shock and scandal and savage delight. She was standing at the altar in a wedding dress that cost $40,000, her hand still extended where Dominic had dropped it, and the man who was supposed to marry her was walking away. "Falcone!" Vincent's voice cracked through the cathedral like thunder. "You gave your word! We have a contract. The contract is void." Dominic had reached the side door, the one that led to the sacristy. He paused, turned back, looked at Elena one last time, and she saw it again. That flicker of something human beneath the ice. "I'm sorry," he said, quieter now. "Just for her. This marriage would destroy me. I can't let that happen." Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than shouting. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The cathedral was frozen, a tableau of collective shock. Then the whispers started. They rippled through the pews like wildfire, voices rising, overlapping, feeding on each other's disbelief and hunger for scandal. Elena stood alone at the altar, her veil still pinned in her hair, her dress still perfect, and heard her life being dismantled in real time. Rejected her at the altar. In front of everyone? What did she do? Must have said something. Damaged goods now. Nobody will want her after this. Elena's legs went weak. She swayed, caught herself on the altar's edge. The flowers mocked her with their beauty, the candles with their romantic glow. This was supposed to be the beginning of her life. Instead, it was the end of everything. Vincent was beside her suddenly, his hand on her elbow, his grip bruising. "Walk," he hissed in her ear. "Head up, now." She couldn't. She couldn't move, couldn't face those 300 people who were still watching, still whispering, tearing her reputation to shreds with every syllable. "Elena." Vincent's voice was steel. "Walk, or I'll carry you out, and that will be even worse." Somehow she moved, one foot in front of the other, her father's hand clamped on her arm, dragging her down the aisle that she'd walked up just minutes ago as a bride-to-be. Now she was nothing, worse than nothing. She was the girl Dominic Falcone had rejected in front of the entire criminal underworld. The whispers followed her out, chased her through the cathedral doors into the sunlight that felt too bright, too cheerful for the death of everything she'd been promised. A black car was waiting. Vincent shoved her inside, climbed in after her, slammed the door. The driver pulled away from the curb before Elena could even reach for her seatbelt. "That bastard," Vincent snarled, his hands clenched into fists. "That arrogant, cowardly bastard. After everything we agreed to, after the contracts, the negotiations?" He whirled on Elena, his eyes blazing. "What did you do?" Elena stared at him. "What? What did you say to him? What did you do to make him walk away?" The accusation hit her like a physical blow. "Nothing. Father, I didn't even speak to him. We barely looked at each other before." "Then why?" Vincent demanded. Men don't reject marriages like this without reason. The alliance was perfect. He stood to gain as much as we did. So why would he humiliate both families unless I what? Elena's voice cracked, tears finally breaking through the shock. Unless I wasn't good enough? Unless I'm so worthless that even a strategic marriage isn't worth it? Vincent's expression flickered. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it hardened again almost immediately. "You're not worthless. But you're damaged now. After that display, every family in Chicago will know that Dominic Falcone found you lacking. Nobody will want you. Nobody will trust you. You're a liability." The words settled over her like a burial shroud. Elena turned to the window, watching the city blur past through tears she couldn't stop. Her father was right. In their world, reputation was everything. And hers had just been destroyed in the most public, humiliating way possible. She was 25 years old, and her life was over. The news spread through Chicago's underworld before Elena even made it home. By the time the car pulled up to the Moreau estate, a sprawling mansion in Lincoln Park that looked like old money but was built on very new blood, her phone was exploding with messages. Most were from people she barely knew, vultures circling to get the details firsthand. A few were from friends, offering sympathy that felt more like pity. Elena ignored all of them. She walked through the front door past the staff who'd been preparing for the reception that would never happen, and locked herself in her bedroom. The dress came off in pieces. She tore at the buttons, the lacing, the delicate beadwork that had taken someone months to complete. It pooled on the floor around her feet, and she stepped out of it like she was stepping out of a grave. In the mirror, wearing nothing but her slip and her mother's diamonds, Elena barely recognized herself. Her makeup was smeared from crying. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. She looked like a ghost of the woman who'd stood at that altar. She looked like exactly what Dominic had made her, disposable. The knock on her door was gentle. "Elena?" Natalie's voice soft and worried. "Can I come in?" Elena didn't answer, but Natalie came in anyway. That was the thing about sisters. They knew when silence meant yes. Natalie took one look at Elena and crossed the room, pulling her into a hug that Elena collapsed into like a broken thing. "I'm ruined," Elena whispered against her sister's shoulder. "He ruined me." "No," Natalie said fiercely. "He's a coward, and you're stronger than this." But Elena didn't feel strong. She felt shattered. The next 3 months were a slow death. Elena stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. Every time she did, she saw the looks, the pity, the contempt, the savage satisfaction from women who'd always envied her position and now reveled in her fall. She heard the whispers that followed her through charity events, family dinners, the rare social obligations she couldn't avoid. That's her, the one Falcone rejected. "I heard she begged him to go through with it. I heard she wasn't pure. That's why he walked away. Poor thing. She'll never marry now, not after that." Her father stopped talking to her unless business required it. He'd lost faith in the rejection too, and he blamed her for it even though she'd done nothing wrong. The alliance had been his idea, his negotiation, his strategy. But she was the one who'd been left at the altar, so she was the one who'd failed. The marriage proposals that had once come regularly, men from allied families, ambitious men who wanted access to Moreau power, dried up completely. Nobody wanted damaged goods. Nobody wanted the woman Dominic Falcone had found lacking. Elena spent her days in the mansion's library, reading, trying to disappear into stories where women had agency and futures and lives that weren't dictated by men's decisions. She spent her nights lying awake, replaying those moments at the altar, trying to understand what she'd done wrong. She never saw Dominic. He'd disappeared back into his Southside fortress after the rejection, and according to the rumors that filtered north, he'd never mentioned the wedding again. It was like it had never happened, like she had never happened. That hurt worst of all. Being humiliated was one thing, being forgotten was another. Natalie was her only lifeline. She visited every day, bringing books and coffee, and a stubborn refusal to let Elena surrender completely to the darkness. "You're not dead," Natalie insisted one afternoon, sprawled across Elena's bed while Elena sat curled in the window seat, staring at nothing. "You're 25 years old, and you have your whole life ahead of you." "What life?" Elena asked bitterly. "I'm unmarriageable, untouchable. I'm a cautionary tale." "Then write a new story." Natalie sat up, her eyes bright with the kind of fierce determination Elena used to have before Dominic crushed it out of her. "You're brilliant, Elena. You have a degree in international business. You speak 4 languages. You could do anything." "In this world?" Elena gestured at the window, at the city beyond. "In our world, Nat, women don't do anything. We marry well, we produce heirs, we maintain the family reputation. And I failed at all 3 before I even started." And Natalie looked like she wanted to argue, but before she could, Elena's phone buzzed. She ignored it. She'd been ignoring calls for months, but it buzzed again. And again. "Answer it," Natalie said. "It might be important." It was. The caller ID showed her father's office line. Elena's stomach dropped as she answered. "Hello?" "Elena." Vincent's voice was clipped, urgent. "Come to my study, now." He hung up before she could ask why. Elena and Natalie exchanged looks. Something was wrong. Vincent never called unless it was business, and he never sounded rattled. 5 minutes later, Elena stood in her father's study, a room of dark wood and leather and the faint smell of cigar smoke, while Vincent paced behind his desk like a caged animal. "The Volkov syndicate is moving against us," he said without preamble. "They hit 3 of our warehouses last night, burned them to the ground. They're targeting our shipping routes, our distribution networks. They want our territory, and they're willing to go to war to get it." Elena's blood went cold. The Volkovs were Russian mob, brutal and efficient. If they were moving openly, it meant they believed the Moreaus were weak enough to take. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that I've called in every favor, every alliance we have." Vincent stopped pacing, looked at her directly. "And it's not enough. We need the Falcones." The name hit her like a fist. "No." "Elena, no." She took a step back, shaking her head. "Not him. Anyone but him." "There is no one else." Vincent's voice was hard, desperate. "The Falcones control the enforcement arm we need to fight the Volkovs. Without Dominic's men, we're outnumbered 3-1. We'll lose everything." "Then lose it," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I won't go crawling to the man who destroyed me." "You won't have to." Vincent moved around the desk, and for the first time in months, he looked at her like she mattered. "He called. This morning. He offered protection, an alliance, everything we need to survive this war." Elena's heart stopped. "Why would he do that?" "Because the Volkovs will come for him next," Vincent said, "and because he wants something in return." Elena already knew. She could see it in her father's eyes, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. "He wants you," Vincent confirmed. "He'll provide protection, resources, men, but only if you agree to marry him. The alliance he walked away from 3 months ago, he wants it now." The room tilted. Elena grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Vincent's expression was granite. "And you're going to agree." "Like hell I am." Fury rose in her chest, burning away the shock. "He humiliated me. He destroyed my reputation, my life, and now he thinks he can just, snap his fingers and I'll come running?" "Yes," Vincent said bluntly, "because if you don't, we're dead. All of us." "The Volkovs don't take prisoners, Elena. They'll burn this house with us inside it." Elena stared at her father, looking for some sign that he cared about more than strategy, more than survival. Looking for some acknowledgement that he understood what he was asking her to do. But Vincent Moreau was a businessman first, a father second, if at all. "I need an answer by tonight," he said. "Dominic is sending a car at 8. You can refuse, and we'll die fighting, or you can accept and we survive." He paused. "The choice is yours." It wasn't a choice. They both knew it. Elena turned and walked out of the study, her mind reeling. Behind her, she heard Natalie following, heard her sister's sharp intake of breath as she processed what had just happened. "Elena," Natalie started. "Don't," Elena cut her off. She kept walking down the hallway, through the house, out into the gardens where she could breathe, where she could think. But there was nothing to think about. Her father was right. The Volkovs were a death sentence, and Dominic Falcone was offering the only way out. All it would cost was her pride, her dignity, the last shreds of self-respect she'd managed to hold on to. Elena stood in the garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, beautiful and violent, like everything in her world. At 7:55 p.m., she walked back into the house, put on a simple black dress, pulled her hair back, erased every trace of emotion from her face. At 8 p.m. exactly, a black Mercedes pulled up to the gate. Elena walked out to meet it, alone. Because if she was going to do this, if she was going to face the man who'd shattered her, she was going to do it on her feet, not cowering. The driver opened the door. She climbed inside, and the car pulled away, carrying her toward the fortress on the south side where Dominic Falcone waited, where her future, whatever that meant now, was about to be rewritten in terms she didn't understand yet. But this time, Elena promised herself as the city lights blurred past, she wouldn't be passive. She wouldn't be the silent, breakable thing she'd been at that altar. This time, she was walking in with her eyes open. And if Dominic Falcone thought he could control her the way he controlled everything else in his world, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The Mercedes moved through Chicago like a shadow, sliding past streetlights and storefronts, carrying Elena deeper into South Side territory with every block. She sat in the back seat with her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, refusing to let the driver see her shake. The partition was up, granting her privacy she didn't want. Privacy meant being alone with her thoughts, and her thoughts were a war zone. 3 months ago, she'd driven to her wedding in a limousine decorated with white ribbons, her heart full of nervous hope that maybe, just maybe, this arranged marriage could become something bearable. Now she was being delivered to the same man like a package, a commodity, a strategic asset being moved into position. The difference was that this time, Elena wasn't hoping for anything except survival. The car turned onto a tree-lined street where the houses grew larger, more isolated, more fortified. This was where Chicago's criminal elite lived when they weren't pretending to be legitimate businessmen downtown. High walls, security cameras, guards who looked like decorative statues until you noticed the bulges under their jackets. And at the end of the street, taking up an entire block, was Dominic Falcone's estate. Elena had never seen it before. The engagement had been conducted in neutral territory: restaurants, her father's office, public spaces where alliances were forged under the guise of civility. But this was Dominic's true domain, and it looked exactly like him: imposing, impenetrable, beautiful in a cold, calculated way. The main house was a modernist fortress of steel and glass, all clean lines and sharp angles. Security lights illuminated manicured grounds that stretched back into darkness. A 10-foot stone wall surrounded the entire property, topped with decorative ironwork that probably concealed cameras and sensors. The gate opened as they approached, smooth and silent, then closed behind them with the finality of a prison door. Elena's pulse quickened despite her determination to stay calm. She was entering enemy territory now, the domain of the man who'd humiliated her, who'd walked away from her like she was nothing, and who now apparently decided she was worth claiming after all. The car stopped at the front entrance. The driver came around, opened her door. Elena stepped out into the cool evening air and looked up at the house towering above her. Every window was lit, making the glass walls glow like a lantern. She could see movement inside, figures crossing through rooms, the suggestion of furniture and art, and a life she knew nothing about. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 50s stood there, dressed in elegant slacks and a silk blouse, her silver hair swept back in a neat bun. She had the air of someone who ran things efficiently and didn't tolerate nonsense. "Miss Moreau," the woman said, her voice crisp but not unkind. "I'm Mrs. Chen, the house manager. Mr. Falcone is expecting you. Please, come in." Elena followed her inside, and despite everything, the fear, the anger, the humiliation churning in her gut, she couldn't help but notice the house was stunning. The entry hall soared 2 stories high, all white marble and exposed steel beams. Modern art hung on the walls, pieces she recognized from auction catalogs. A floating staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, each step a sheet of glass that seemed to hang in midair. Everything was pristine, controlled, exact, like the man who owned it. Mrs. Chen led her through the house, down a hallway lined with more art, abstract pieces in blacks and grays and deep reds that looked like violence rendered beautiful. They passed a living room furnished in leather and chrome, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that actually held books, not just decorative spines. "Mr. Falcone is in his study," Mrs. Chen said as they stopped before a set of double doors at the end of the hall. "He asked that you join him there." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "May I bring you anything? Tea? Water?" "No," Elena said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you." Mrs. Chen nodded, knocked once, and opened the door. The study was smaller than Elena expected, more intimate. One wall was entirely windows looking out over the grounds. The others held bookshelves and a collection of what looked like vintage weapons, swords, daggers, even a flintlock pistol mounted in a glass case. A desk dominated the center of the room, clean except for a laptop and a single glass of whiskey. And behind the desk, standing with his back to the door, looking out at the darkened grounds, was Dominic Falcone. He didn't turn when she entered. Didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Just stood there in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his whiskey glass. Mrs. Chen retreated, closing the door with a soft click that sounded too loud in the silence. Elena waited. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, taut and dangerous. Finally, she'd had enough. "You asked me here," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "The least you can do is look at me." Dominic turned slowly. His face was exactly as she remembered. Severe, beautiful, utterly controlled. But his eyes were different. They held something she hadn't seen before. Something that looked almost like exhaustion. "Elena," he said. Just her name. Nothing else. His voice was deep, rough around the edges, like he didn't use it much. "Don't," she snapped. "Don't say my name like we're friends. Like you didn't destroy my life 3 months ago." Something flickered in his expression. "I know what I did." "Do you?" Elena took a step forward, and then another, her fury finally breaking free of the control she'd been gripping so tightly. "Do you have any idea what the last 3 months have been like? The whispers, the looks, the way people cross the street to avoid me because being associated with the woman you rejected might be contagious?" Dominic set his glass down on the desk with precise care. "I never intended—" "You never intended what? To humiliate me? To destroy my reputation? To make me unmarriageable in a world where that's the only value a woman has?" She was close to him now, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "You didn't intend it, but you did it anyway. And now you have the audacity to call me here and what? Ask me to marry you like nothing happened?" "Yes," Dominic said simply. The blunt admission stopped her short. Elena stared at him, trying to understand how anyone could be that coldly honest. "Why?" she demanded. "Why reject me then, and want me now? What changed?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face like he was trying to memorize it. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost careful. "Nothing changed. That's the problem." "I don't understand." "I know." He moved around the desk, leaning against it, putting himself at her level instead of above her. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. 3 months ago, I stood at that altar and looked at you, and I realized something that terrified me." Elena's heart was pounding. "What?" "That I wanted you." The words came out flat, emotionless, but there was something underneath them, something raw. Not the alliance, not the strategic advantage. You. And in my world, Elena, wanting something that much is the fastest way to lose everything. She couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was saying. "So you walked away." "I walked away," Dominic confirmed. "I told myself it was better to lose the alliance than to give my enemies a weapon they could use against me. Because that's what you would have been. A vulnerability. The one thing I cared about more than power." Elena shook her head, anger and confusion, and something dangerously close to understanding warring inside her. "That's insane! You don't even know me!" "I know enough." Dominic's gaze didn't waver. "I know you speak 4 languages and have a degree in international business. I know you volunteer at that women's shelter on the north side, under a fake name because you don't want credit. I know you read Tolstoy in the original Russian and you think nobody notices. I know you're brilliant and kind and strong, and I knew that if I married you, I'd never be able to think clearly again." The confession hung between them, stark and honest and completely devastating. "So what changed?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I was dangerous then, I'm dangerous now." "The Volkovs changed everything," Dominic said. "When I heard they were targeting your family, that they were coming for you specifically." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I realized that walking away didn't make you safe. It just meant I wasn't there to protect you. And that was worse than any vulnerability." Elena wanted to hate him, wanted to throw his words back in his face and tell him it was too late, that she'd spent 3 months putting herself back together, and she didn't need his protection or his marriage or anything else from him. But she could see the truth in his eyes, the fear that he'd tried to hide 3 months ago and couldn't hide now. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Dominic continued. "I'm asking you to let me fix what I broke. Marry me, Elena. Let me protect you and your family. Let me prove that I can be what you need. What I need, Elena repeated slowly, is for you to understand that I'm not a possession. I'm not a strategic asset or a vulnerability or a weapon. I'm a person, and you shattered me. I know. Do you? She moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Because if I agree to this, if I marry you, it won't be on your terms. It won't be me sitting quietly in your fortress while you make decisions about my life. If you want me, Dominic, you get all of me, including the parts that are angry and broken and will never fully trust you. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. I wouldn't expect anything less. Then tell me the truth, Elena demanded. Not the political truth, not the strategic truth. The real truth. Why do you want this marriage? Dominic was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all the control he usually wore like armor. Because when I walked away from you, I thought I was choosing strength over weakness, power over vulnerability. But I was wrong. He straightened, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The last 3 months have been hell. Every day I wondered if you were okay, if you hated me, if I destroyed something I could never get back. And when I heard the Volkovs were coming for you, I realized that I'd rather die protecting you than live knowing I'd left you defenseless. That's not strategy, Elena. That's... He stopped. Couldn't seem to say the word. That's what? Elena pressed. Dominic looked at her with an expression that was equal parts fear and determination. That's as close to love as I know how to get. The confession punched through her defenses like a bullet. Elena stood frozen, her mind reeling, trying to reconcile this raw, honest man with the cold, controlled one who'd walked away from their wedding. I don't know if I can believe you, she said finally. I don't know if I can trust that this is real and not just another calculation. Then don't, Dominic said. Don't trust me. But marry me anyway. Let me prove it with actions instead of words. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to walk out of this fortress and never look back, consequences be damned. But she couldn't, because her father was right. The Volkovs would kill them all if she refused. And because despite everything, despite the humiliation and the pain, some part of her wanted to believe that Dominic Falcone was capable of being more than the monster his reputation suggested. I have conditions, she said. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed. Name them. First, this marriage is a partnership. You don't make decisions about my life without consulting me. I'm not a decorative wife who sits quietly while you run your empire. Agreed. Second, I want honesty, complete honesty. No more secrets, no more strategic omissions. If you're going to ask me to trust you, you have to earn it. Agreed. Third, Elena took a breath, steadying herself. If you ever humiliate me like that again, if you ever make me feel disposable or worthless or like I'm just a piece in your game, I will leave, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly why. Dominic nodded slowly. Understood. And fourth, Elena continued, her voice stronger now, you're going to tell me everything about this war with the Volkovs, every detail, every strategy, every risk. Because if my life is on the line, I deserve to know what I'm facing. Fair enough. Dominic moved to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a folder. He handed it to her. This is everything we know about the Volkov Syndicate's movements in the last 6 months, personnel, territory, tactics. I was going to brief you tonight anyway. Elena took the folder, surprised. She'd expected resistance, negotiation, not immediate compliance. You're serious, she said, about the partnership. Completely. Dominic met her eyes. I meant what I said, Elena. I don't want a decorative wife. I want you, your mind, your strength, your perspective. If we're going to survive this war, we'll need both of us working together. Elena opened the folder, scanning the contents. Intelligence reports, surveillance photos, financial records. It was comprehensive, detailed, and deeply troubling. The Volkovs had been planning this move for months, systematically targeting Moreau assets while building their own forces. They're not just after territory, she said, reading between the lines. They're trying to eliminate us entirely. Yes, Dominic confirmed. Dominic, they see the potential alliance between our families as a threat. If we unite, we're too powerful for them to challenge, so they're moving now while we're still divided. Then we need to move faster. Elena closed the folder, her mind already working through strategies. When do you want the wedding? Dominic blinked, clearly surprised by the sudden shift. As soon as possible. This weekend, if you're willing. No. He frowned. Elena, not a cathedral wedding, she clarified. Not a spectacle. I'm not standing in front of 300 people again while they whisper about whether you'll actually go through with it this time. Understanding crossed Dominic's face. What do you want? Private, Elena said firmly. Just us, the officiant, and our families. No guests, no press, no performance. If we're doing this, we're doing it because it's necessary, not because it's a show. Dominic considered that for a moment, then nodded. I can arrange that. My lawyer can file the license tomorrow. We can have the ceremony here in the house on Saturday. 3 days. Elena's stomach flipped at how quickly this was moving, but she forced herself to stay focused. Speed was necessary. The Volkovs wouldn't wait. Fine, she said, but I need something else. What? Elena met his eyes, letting him see the steel she'd forged in the last 3 months. I need to know that when we walk into that ceremony, you won't change your mind. Because I can survive a lot of things, Dominic, but I can't survive being abandoned again. The vulnerability in her voice seemed to crack something in him. Dominic moved closer, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he reached out. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. I won't walk away, he said, his voice rough. I swear it. Whatever happens, whatever I'm feeling, I will be there. You have my word. Elena wanted to pull away from his touch, to maintain the anger and distance that kept her safe. But she was exhausted from fighting, from hurting, from pretending she didn't feel the dangerous pull toward this man who'd broken her. Your word wasn't worth much 3 months ago, she whispered. I know. Dominic's eyes held hers, dark and intense. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove it is now. For a long moment, they stood like that, his hand on her face, her eyes searching his for any sign of deception. Elena didn't find any, just exhaustion and determination and that raw, almost fearful honesty he'd shown her earlier. Okay, she said finally, stepping back from his touch before she did something stupid like believe him completely. 3 days. But Dominic, if you fail me again, there won't be a third chance. I understand. Elena turned toward the door, needing distance, needing air. But before she left, she looked back at him. One more thing. Yes? Stop looking at me like I'm something fragile that might break. I already broke once. I survived it. Whatever comes next, I can handle it. A ghost of a smile crossed Dominic's face, the first real expression she'd seen from him that wasn't calculated or controlled. I'm beginning to understand that. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway when Elena emerged, as if she'd been standing guard. Miss Moreau, the car is ready to take you home whenever you're ready. Thank you. Elena started to follow her, then paused. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? The older woman's expression softened. Of course. How long have you worked for Mr. Falcone? 15 years since he first took over the estate. And in that time, have you ever seen him? Elena searched for the right words. Have you ever seen him care about anything the way he seems to care about this? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much to say. Mr. Falcone is a very controlled man, she said finally. He doesn't allow himself to want things. It makes him weak, he says. But these last 3 months, she shook her head. I've never seen him like that. Whatever he told you in there, Miss Moreau, I believe he meant it. Elena didn't know what to do with that information, so she simply nodded and followed Mrs. Chen back through the fortress. The ride home gave her time to think, to process, to panic slightly about what she'd just agreed to. In 3 days, she'd marry Dominic Falcone, the same man who'd destroyed her, the same man who'd just confessed something that might have been love but sounded more like possession. When she walked into the Moreau estate, her father was waiting in his study. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Well?" Vincent asked. "It's done," Elena said. "We're getting married Saturday. Private ceremony, here or at his estate, immediate alliance." Vincent's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God. The Volkovs hit another warehouse tonight. We're losing ground fast." Elena felt nothing at his relief. No satisfaction, no resentment, just a cold, clear understanding that this was the world she lived in, where daughters were bargaining chips and marriages were battle strategies. "I'm going to bed," she said, turning to leave. "Elena." Vincent's voice stopped her. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but you're saving us. You know that, right?" She looked back at him, this man who'd raised her to be useful, to be strategic, to understand that love was a luxury their world couldn't afford. "I'm saving myself," she corrected quietly. "The rest of you just benefit from it." She left before he could respond. Natalie was waiting in Elena's room, curled up on the bed like she used to do when they were children and the world seemed scary. "Tell me everything," Natalie demanded the moment Elena walked in. So Elena did. She sat beside her sister and told her about the fortress, the study, the conversation that had ended with a wedding date 3 days away. She told her about Dominic's confession, his fear, his promise that he wouldn't walk away again. "Do you believe him?" Natalie asked when Elena finished. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks I'm an idiot for even considering it." "You're not an idiot." Natalie took her hand. "You're brave, and you're right. If you're going to do this, you should do it on your terms." Elena squeezed her sister's hand, grateful for the support. "Will you stand with me? At the ceremony?" "Of course," Natalie said immediately. "Always." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt nothing like the weeks of planning before the cathedral wedding. This time, there were no florists or caterers, no guest lists or seating charts, just a quiet, efficient gathering of paperwork and witnesses. Elena chose a simple dress, ivory silk, elegant but understated, nothing like the elaborate gown she'd worn before. She refused to let this wedding be anything like that disaster. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Elena stood in her room, looking at herself in the mirror, and felt the same sick nervousness she'd felt 3 months ago. But underneath it was something else, something harder, sharper. Determination. This time, she wasn't walking toward a wedding as a passive participant in someone else's strategy. She was walking in as a partner, an equal, someone who'd negotiated her own terms and refused to be disposable. The ceremony was held in the Moreau Estate's library, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Just immediate family, Vincent, Natalie, and Elena's uncle Marcus on her side. Dominic's younger brother Anthony, Mrs. Chen, and his lawyer on his. And Dominic himself, standing at the makeshift altar in a dark suit, his expression controlled but his eyes locked on Elena from the moment she entered the room. This time, when she walked toward him, she did it alone. No father to give her away. No illusions about what this was. When she reached him, Dominic extended his hand. Elena took it and felt his fingers close around hers, warm, steady, and this time he didn't let go. The officiant kept it brief. No poetry about love, no grand pronouncements, just the legal minimum that would bind them together. "Do you, Dominic Michael Falcone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Dominic's eyes never left Elena's face. "I do." "Do you, Elena Marie Moreau, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Elena took a breath. This was it, the moment that would change everything. "I do," she said clearly. The officiant pronounced them married. Dominic leaned in, paused as if asking permission, then kissed her gently when she didn't pull away. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't passionate, it was a promise, sealed in front of witnesses. When they pulled apart, Elena saw something in Dominic's eyes that hadn't been there before. Relief, pure, unguarded relief. And despite everything, the pain, the doubt, the fear, Elena felt something shift inside her. Maybe this marriage could be more than survival. Maybe it could be salvation for both of them. The reception was modest, just champagne and quiet conversation in the same library where they'd exchanged vows. Elena stood beside Dominic, their hands still linked, and accepted congratulations that felt more like condolences. Her father shook Dominic's hand with the satisfied air of a man who'd closed a profitable deal. Natalie hugged Elena fiercely and whispered, "Be careful," in her ear, like she was sending her sister off to war. Maybe she was. Anthony Falcone approached them with 2 glasses of champagne, his expression far warmer than his older brother's ever was. He was younger than Dominic by 5 years, with the same dark hair but softer features, eyes that held humor instead of calculation. "Welcome to the family," Anthony said, handing Elena a glass. "For what it's worth, I think you're either the bravest woman in Chicago or completely insane." "Can I be both?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the hint of dark humor. Anthony laughed. "I like her," he said to Dominic. "Try not to mess this up." "Planning on it," Dominic replied, his tone dry but his hand tightening slightly on Elena's. The gathering dispersed within the hour. No one lingered, no one pretended this was anything but a business arrangement wrapped in legal vows. Vincent left with Marcus, already discussing security protocols and territory defense. Natalie gave Elena one last hug before climbing into the car that would take her back to her apartment downtown. And then it was just Elena and Dominic standing in the library as Mrs. Chen quietly supervised the staff cleaning up glasses and straightening chairs. "Your things have been moved to the estate," Dominic said quietly. "We should go." Elena's stomach dropped. Of course, she was his wife now. His house was her house. Her entire life had just been packed up and relocated while she was saying vows. "All of it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything you'd need for now. If there's something missing, we can retrieve it." Dominic studied her face. "Elena, if you want to wait a few days before moving in—" "No," she interrupted. "We agreed this was a partnership. That means we start now, not when it's convenient." Something that might have been admiration flickered in his expression. "All right then, let's go home." Home. The word felt foreign, dangerous, but Elena nodded and followed him out to the car. The drive to the south side was silent. Dominic sat beside her in the back seat, his attention on his phone as he read through what looked like security reports. Elena watched the city pass by, landmarks that had been familiar her entire life now marking the boundary between her old world and her new one. When they pulled through the gates of the estate, evening had settled over Chicago, painting the glass fortress in shades of amber and shadow. Elena climbed out of the car and stared up at the building that was supposed to be her home now, trying to feel something other than displacement. Mrs. Chen met them at the door. "Your suite is ready, Mrs. Falcone. I've prepared dinner if you're hungry, or I can have something sent up if you'd prefer privacy." Mrs. Falcone. The name landed like a brand. "Dinner sounds fine," Elena managed. "Thank you." Dominic touched her elbow gently. "I'll show you to our rooms first. Give you time to settle in." Our rooms. Elena's pulse quickened as she followed him through the house, up the floating staircase to the second floor. The hallway was quiet, lit by recessed lighting that made everything feel like a gallery. Dominic stopped at a set of double doors at the end of the hall and pushed them open. The suite was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the grounds, now lit by security lights that turned the gardens into a patchwork of light and shadow. The bedroom was done in shades of gray and white, minimalist but not cold. A king-size bed dominated one wall. 2 doors led off the main room, one to what looked like a bathroom, the other to a walk-in closet. Elena's suitcases were stacked neatly beside the closet door. Seeing them there, in this unfamiliar space, made everything suddenly, brutally real. "The closet is split," Dominic said, his voice careful. "Left side is yours. The bathroom has separate vanities, and if you need anything, privacy, space, whatever, just say so." Elena turned to look at him. He stood near the door, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. "Usually, I mean." "Here," Dominic said, "but I can take one of the guest rooms if you'd prefer." "On our wedding night?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "That would certainly send a message to your staff." "I don't care what message it sends," Dominic said quietly. "I care that you're comfortable." Elena wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Comfortable. She'd just married a man who'd publicly humiliated her 3 months ago, moved into his fortress, and was now expected to share his bed like this was a normal marriage. "I'm not going to pretend we're in love," she said bluntly, "but I'm also not going to act like we're strangers. We made an agreement, a partnership. That includes sharing a bedroom like a married couple." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Elena, unless you don't want to," she interrupted, suddenly uncertain. "Unless this is all just strategy for you and the thought of actually—" "It's not just strategy." The words came out rough, almost harsh. Dominic crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that Elena had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I told you, I want you. I have since the moment I saw you. But I also know I have no right to expect anything from you after what I did." Elena's heart was hammering against her ribs. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man at war with himself. "Then we're even," she said quietly, "because I don't know what I expect either. But I know I'm tired of living in fear, tired of feeling broken. And if this marriage is going to mean anything, we have to start somewhere." Dominic raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face the way he had in his study 3 nights ago, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Honesty," Elena whispered. "Just be honest with me. About everything. About what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're afraid of." "I'm afraid I'll fail you," Dominic admitted, his voice dropping to something raw and unguarded. "I'm afraid that even though I swore I wouldn't walk away, some part of me will try to run when things get too real. I'm afraid that wanting you this much makes me weak, and that weakness will get you killed." The confession hung between them, stark and vulnerable. Elena saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear that had driven him away from the altar, but this time he wasn't running from it. "Then we'll both be afraid together," she said, covering his hand with hers, "and we'll figure it out as we go." Dominic leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him. Elena didn't. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it wasn't the careful public kiss from the ceremony. This was desperate, hungry, 3 months of longing and regret and barely suppressed need breaking free all at once. Elena gasped against his mouth as Dominic's arms came around her, pulling her close. She'd expected coldness from him, calculation. But there was nothing calculated about the way he kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. Nothing controlled about the way his hands trembled slightly as they slid up her back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena saw something in Dominic's eyes that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Surrender. Complete, devastating surrender to whatever this thing was between them. "Stay," she whispered. "Don't take the guest room. Just stay." Dominic nodded, his forehead resting against hers. "Okay." That night they learned each other in the darkness of that massive bedroom. Not just physically, though that too, but in the quiet conversations between touches. Elena told him about the 3 months after the wedding, the isolation and whispers and slow death of her reputation. Dominic told her about the same 3 months from his perspective, the regret that ate at him, the way he'd driven himself into work trying to forget her and failed every single time. "I followed you," he admitted in the early hours of morning, his voice rough with sleep and confession, "after the wedding. I had someone keep tabs on you, made sure you were safe." Elena propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the windows. "You had me followed?" "I know how it sounds," Dominic said, "but I needed to know you were all right, that rejecting you hadn't put you in danger." She should have been angry, should have seen it as a violation, but instead, Elena felt something close to understanding. In their world, protection often looked like surveillance. "Tell me next time," she said finally. "If you're worried about my safety, tell me. Don't just make decisions about my life without including me." "Deal," Dominic agreed, pulling her back down against his chest. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd hurt each other finding something like peace in the wreckage. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. She was alone in the bed, the sheets beside her still warm. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he left? Had he walked away again? But then she heard movement in the bathroom and relaxed. She was pulling on a robe when Dominic emerged, already dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, looking every inch the powerful crime boss he was. But when he saw her, his expression softened. "Morning," he said, crossing to her. "I was going to bring you coffee, but you're awake." "What time is it?" "9. I let you sleep in." Dominic handed her a mug that had appeared from somewhere. "We have a meeting at 11, strategy session about the Volkovs. I want you there." Elena took the coffee, the warmth seeping into her hands. "You're serious about the partnership?" "Completely." Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, his attention fully on her. "You're brilliant, Elena. I've read your thesis on international supply chain management. I've seen the consulting work you did for your father's shipping company. I'd be an idiot not to use that mind." The compliment caught her off guard. In her world, women were valued for beauty, breeding, connections, not intelligence. "What's the meeting about?" she asked, settling into the chair by the window. "Retaliation," Dominic said bluntly. "The Volkovs have hit 4 of your father's warehouses in the last week. They're testing our response, seeing if the marriage actually means an alliance or if it's just paperwork. We need to hit back hard enough to make them think twice, but smart enough that we don't trigger an all-out war we're not ready for." Elena's mind started working through possibilities. What about their supply lines? If they're expanding territory, they need resources. Cut off their supply, you force them to negotiate. Dominic's eyes sharpened with interest. "Go on. They're Russian mob, right? That means a lot of their high-end merchandise, weapons, luxury goods for resale, comes through international channels. If we could intercept those shipments, or better yet, turn their suppliers, we'd cripple their operations without firing a shot. That's assuming we can identify their suppliers." "We can." Elena stood, crossing to where her laptop bag sat beside her suitcases. She pulled out her computer, opened it, and pulled up files she'd been compiling for the last 3 days. "I spent the last 72 hours researching the Volkov syndicate, cross-referenced shipping manifests from the Port Authority with known Russian mob associates. I've identified 3 companies that are almost certainly fronts for weapons smuggling." Dominic stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. His silence stretched long enough that Elena started to worry she'd overstepped. But when he finally spoke, his voice held something like awe. "You did this in 3 days?" "I had time to kill between fittings," Elena said dryly. "And I don't like walking into situations blind. If I'm going to be part of this war, I need to understand the battlefield." Dominic turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Elena, this is exactly what we need. This is—" He stopped, shook his head. "I knew you were smart. I didn't realize you were strategic." "There's a difference?" "Smart is academic," Dominic said. "Strategic is actionable. You just handed me a way to hurt the Volkovs without escalating to open warfare. That's worth more than a dozen soldiers." Pride bloomed in Elena's chest, unfamiliar and warming. "So you'll use it?" "Absolutely. And you're presenting it at the meeting." Elena's confidence wavered. "Dominic, I'm not— Your men don't know me. They're not going to respect strategy from someone they see as just your wife." "Then they'll learn," Dominic said firmly. "You're my partner, Elena. That means you have equal authority in this organization. Anyone who doesn't respect that doesn't belong here." The meeting was held in a conference room on the estate's lower level, a space Elena hadn't seen before. It was all business: large table, screens for presentations, enough security that she had to pass through 2 checkpoints just to enter. 8 men were already seated when Dominic and Elena walked in. She recognized a few faces from the wedding. Anthony was there, along with several men who had the look of soldiers, dangerous and watchful. They all stood when Dominic entered, a gesture of respect that felt almost military. "Sit," Dominic said, moving to the head of the table. Elena took the seat beside him, acutely aware of the eyes tracking her every movement. "Most of you have met my wife, Elena. For those who haven't, understand this. She has full authority in this organization. Her word carries the same weight as mine. Any strategy she presents has my complete backing." The room went very still. Anthony looked impressed. A few of the others looked skeptical. One man, older, scarred, with the dead eyes of someone who'd done too much killing, looked openly hostile. "With respect, boss," the scarred man said, his voice rough. "She's been in this world for 48 hours. How can she possibly— Matteo, Dominic interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. I suggest you listen before you finish that sentence. Matteo's jaw clenched, but he fell silent. Elena stood, pulling up her presentation on the main screen. Her hands wanted to shake, but she forced them steady. This was her world now. She needed to claim her space in it. The Volkov syndicate has expanded aggressively in the last 6 months, she began, her voice clear and professional. They've hit Moreau assets 4 times, Catalano territory twice, and they've been recruiting soldiers from smaller crews. On the surface, it looks like they're preparing for war, but wars require resources. She clicked through to the shipping manifests. These 3 companies, Nordstrom Imports, Baltic Trading, and Seaway Logistics, are all registered to shell corporations with ties to known Volkov associates. In the last year, they've processed over $50 million in merchandise through the Chicago ports. Weapons, electronics, luxury vehicles, all of it resold through Volkov channels. How did you get this information? One of the men asked, his tone more curious than hostile. Port Authority records are public if you know how to read them, Elena said. And I have contacts in the legitimate shipping industry from my consulting work. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. She pulled up the next slide. Here's my recommendation. We don't hit the Volkovs directly. We hit their suppliers. We approach these 3 companies and make them a better offer. We have the infrastructure to move their merchandise more efficiently than the Volkovs can. We can offer protection they're not getting, and we can do it without the FBI breathing down their necks. You want to turn their suppliers, Anthony said, leaning forward with interest. Cut off their resources before they can escalate. Exactly, Elena confirmed. The Volkovs can't wage war if they can't arm their soldiers. And if we control their supply lines, we control the pace of the conflict. We can force them to negotiate on our terms. Matteo was frowning, but it was a thoughtful frown now. What if the suppliers refuse? What if they're too committed to the Volkovs to switch? Then we go to Plan B, Elena said calmly. We intercept the shipments. We have enough legitimate business at the ports to create disruptions, inspections, delays, lost containers. It's not as clean as turning the suppliers, but it achieves the same goal. The room was silent for a moment. Then Dominic spoke, his voice carrying absolute authority. Thoughts? It's smart, Anthony said immediately. Hits them where they're vulnerable without giving them a target to hit back. It's also risky, Matteo added, but his hostility had faded to something like grudging respect. If we move on their suppliers and they find out, they'll see it as an act of war. They've already declared war, Dominic pointed out. 4 warehouses burned. We're just choosing how to fight it. He looked at Elena. What's the timeline on this? 2 weeks to make contact with the suppliers and present offers. Another week for them to consider. If we move fast, we can have their supply chain disrupted before the end of the month. Dominic nodded slowly. Do it. Anthony, you'll coordinate with Elena on the supplier outreach. Matteo, I want surveillance on all 3 companies. If the Volkovs get word we're moving, I want to know immediately. The meeting continued for another hour, working through logistics and contingencies. Elena contributed where she could, mostly listening and learning how Dominic's organization operated. It was efficient, professional, and utterly ruthless in its clarity. When they finally broke, Anthony lingered behind. That was impressive, he said to Elena. Matteo's been with us for 15 years, and even he looked convinced. I wasn't sure I could pull it off, Elena admitted. You did more than pull it off, Dominic said, his hand finding the small of her back. You gave us a strategy that actually works. Most of these meetings end with more questions than answers. Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not quite trust. Not yet. But the beginning of something that could become trust if they nurtured it carefully enough. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Elena threw herself into the supplier outreach, using her legitimate business contacts to arrange meetings, present offers, negotiate terms. It was delicate work. These were men who'd built relationships with the Volkovs, who had reasons to be loyal beyond just money. But Elena had something the Volkovs didn't: credibility in the legitimate world. She could promise not just profits, but protection from law enforcement scrutiny. 2 of the 3 companies agreed to switch within 10 days. The third was waffling, clearly torn between the better offer and fear of Volkov retaliation. Elena was in Dominic's study, going over the third company's financials, when Mrs. Chen knocked softly on the door. "Mrs. Falcone, you have a visitor, your sister." Elena looked up, surprised. Natalie hadn't visited since the wedding, though they'd texted daily. "Send her in." But when Natalie walked through the door, Elena knew immediately something was wrong. Her sister's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Nat?" Elena was on her feet instantly. "What happened?" "It's father," Natalie said, her voice shaking. "The Volkovs, they took him 2 hours ago. He was leaving a meeting downtown and they grabbed him off the street in broad daylight." The world tilted. Elena gripped the edge of the desk to stay upright. "Are you sure? Maybe he's just—" "They sent a message." Natalie pulled out her phone, hands trembling. "They want you, Elena. They said they'll trade father for you. You have 24 hours to turn yourself over or they'll kill him." Elena stared at the message on the screen, her mind refusing to process the words. This wasn't possible. The Volkovs were supposed to be focused on territory, on resources, not kidnapping. Dominic appeared in the doorway, his expression dark. He'd clearly heard. "When did this happen?" 2 hours ago, Natalie repeated. "Elena, what are we going to do?" "We're getting him back," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Dominic." "No," Dominic interrupted, his tone absolute. "Absolutely not. You're not turning yourself over to them." "He's my father. And you're my wife," Dominic said, crossing to her. "They don't want to trade, Elena. They want to break me. They know taking you is the one thing I won't survive." The words should have felt manipulative, strategic. Instead, they felt devastatingly honest. "So what do we do?" Elena asked. "Let them kill him?" "We get him back," Dominic said grimly. "But not by giving them what they want." He pulled out his phone, made 3 calls in rapid succession. Within minutes, the study was filled with men. Anthony, Matteo, others Elena had seen at meetings but didn't know well. "The Volkovs have Vincent Moreau," Dominic said without preamble. "They're demanding Elena in exchange. That's not happening. So we're going to take him back." "Do we know where they're holding him?" Anthony asked. "Not yet," Dominic said, "but we will. Matteo, activate every contact we have. I want eyes on every Volkov property in the city. Anthony, pull traffic cam footage from the abduction site. They had to take him somewhere, and they had to do it fast." The room exploded into coordinated chaos. Men dispersed to their tasks, phones appearing, orders being given. Elena watched it happen, feeling useless and terrified in equal measure. Natalie grabbed her hand. "They'll find him," she whispered. Elena wanted to believe her, but all she could think about was the message. 24 hours. And the clock was already ticking. 2 hours later, they had a location. A warehouse on the far south side, abandoned for years but recently showing signs of activity. Traffic cameras had caught 3 black SUVs heading in that direction minutes after Vincent's abduction. Satellite imagery showed heat signatures inside the building, at least a dozen people, maybe more. Dominic stood in his study, surrounded by maps and surveillance photos spread across his desk like battle plans. Elena watched him work, saw the cold calculation in his eyes as he assessed entry points, guard rotations, weaknesses in the Volkov's hastily assembled fortress. "It's a trap," Matteo said bluntly, stabbing a finger at the warehouse schematic. "They took Moreau in broad daylight, made sure we'd find him. They want you to come charging in so they can take out both of you at once." "I know it's a trap," Dominic said calmly. "That's why we're going to spring it on our terms." Anthony leaned over the desk, studying the satellite image. "They've got 3 vehicles outside, probably more inside. Figure 20 men minimum, all armed. We can match that in numbers, but storming a fortified position—" "We're not storming anything," Dominic interrupted. He traced a line on the map, following what looked like old utility tunnels. "This warehouse was built in the 50s. It's connected to the city's old industrial tunnel system. Most of it's collapsed, but this section—" He tapped a specific spot. "This section was reinforced 10 years ago for a development project that never happened. It's still accessible." Elena moved closer, her eyes following the tunnel route. "You can get in underneath them." "We can get in underneath them," Dominic corrected, his gaze meeting hers. Small team, quiet approach. We extract your father while they're watching the front door. And when they realize what's happening, Mateo challenged, when they understand you've outmaneuvered them, they'll kill everyone in that building. Not if we give them something else to focus on. Dominic's smile was sharp, dangerous. We give them the frontal assault they're expecting. Loud, obvious, drawing every guard to the main entrance. While they're busy with that, we pull Vincent out through the tunnels. That's suicide for whoever's running the assault, Anthony said quietly. It's a distraction, Dominic countered. Timed explosives, flashbangs, enough noise to make them think we're coming in hard. We don't actually need to breach the building. We just need them to believe we are. Elena watched the plan take shape, saw the pieces clicking into place. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure, and it required precision they might not have. What about timing? She asked. If the distraction happens too early, they'll have time to secure the prisoner. Too late, and your team is trapped underground. Dominic nodded, acknowledging the problem. We need someone inside, someone who can signal when Vincent is ready for extraction. The room went quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. Someone had to get inside the warehouse, past the guards, close enough to Vincent to coordinate the rescue, and that someone would likely not make it out. I'll do it, Elena said. Every head turned toward her. Dominic's expression went carefully blank the way it did when he was restraining something violent. No, he said simply. They want me, Elena pointed out, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. They sent the message to me specifically. I can walk in there, demand to see my father, and they'll let me because I'm exactly what they're after. And then they'll have both of you, Dominic said, his control fracturing enough that she could hear the fear underneath. That's not a rescue, Elena. That's giving them everything they want. Not if I'm wearing a wire, Elena countered. Not if I can get close enough to signal when you should move. They're not going to kill me immediately. I'm too valuable as leverage against you. That gives us a window. A window that closes the second they realize we're not negotiating, Mateo interjected. He looked at Dominic. Boss, she's right about the access, but she's wrong about the risk. The moment we move, they'll kill her to spite you. Then we make sure they can't, Elena said, her mind working through the angles. What if I go in offering a trade? Not me for my father, but information for his release. Something valuable enough that they'll keep both of us alive until they verify it. Dominic was shaking his head before she finished. What information could you possibly... Your supplier network, Elena said quietly. The companies we just turned. I tell them I can give them the suppliers we stole, complete with shipping schedules and distribution routes. That buys us time while they try to verify the information. And when they discover you're lying? They won't discover it in time, Elena said. The rescue happens within an hour of me going in. I stall, I negotiate, I demand proof my father's alive. By the time they realize the information is worthless, we're already gone. The room erupted in argument. Anthony thought it was too risky. Mateo thought it could work if they had proper backup. Two other men Elena didn't know well weighed in with tactical concerns and contingency plans. Through it all, Dominic stood silent, his eyes locked on Elena with an intensity that made her skin burn. Finally, he raised a hand and the room fell quiet. Everyone out, he said. I need to speak with my wife alone. The men filed out, though Anthony hesitated at the door. Dom, out, Dominic repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. When the door closed, the silence was suffocating. Dominic crossed to the windows, his back to Elena, his shoulders rigid with tension. You can't ask this of me, he said finally, his voice rough. You can't ask me to send you into a death trap. I'm not asking, Elena said. I'm telling you this is the best option we have. The best option is to go in with overwhelming force, Dominic shot back, whirling to face her, to hit them so hard they don't have time to execute prisoners, to make them understand that taking what's mine has consequences. And how many people die in that scenario? Your men? The hostages? Anyone caught in the crossfire? Elena moved toward him, refusing to back down. This is my father, Dominic, and it's my decision. Your decision affects me, Dominic said harshly. Your decision determines whether I lose the only person I've ever... He stopped, his jaw clenching. You don't get to make that choice without me. Elena's heart stuttered at the near confession. Then help me make it work. Use your tactical mind and find a way to keep me alive instead of just refusing to let me try. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to lock her away, keep her safe, remove her from any possible danger, and the part that recognized she was right, that her plan gave them the best chance of success. If I agree to this, he said slowly, you follow my rules. You wear the equipment I give you, you say exactly what I tell you to say, and the second things go wrong, you get out. You don't try to be a hero, you don't wait for me. You run. Deal, Elena said, as long as you promise you're coming for me. Dominic closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contradicted the violence she could see brewing in his expression. Elena, I would burn this city to the ground to get you back. Don't ever doubt that. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena saw something in his eyes that terrified her more than the kidnapping, more than the Volkovs. She saw love, real, devastating, all-consuming love. I need you to come back to me, Dominic whispered against her forehead. Whatever happens in there, you come back. I will, Elena promised, even though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. The next 3 hours were a controlled frenzy of preparation. Dominic outfitted Elena with a wire so small it was nearly invisible, embedded in a necklace she wore under her shirt. He gave her an earpiece that looked like a hearing aid, disguised well enough to pass casual inspection. And he made her memorize the layout of the warehouse, the tunnel entry points, the exact phrasing she'd use to buy time. Natalie wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be another way. But Elena held her sister and promised her this would work, even though the fear in Natalie's eyes suggested neither of them believed it. At midnight, Elena climbed into a car driven by one of Dominic's men she didn't recognize. The plan was simple. She'd be dropped 3 blocks from the warehouse, walk in alone, and make contact with the Volkovs. The moment she was inside, Dominic's team would move into position in the tunnels. Dominic stood beside the car, his expression carved from stone. Remember, he said quietly, adjusting the collar of her jacket to hide the wire. You're there to negotiate, not to surrender. Keep them talking, keep them focused on the information you're offering, and trust that I'm coming. I trust you, Elena said, and realized she meant it. Dominic's expression cracked just slightly. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he could keep her safe through sheer force of will. 20 minutes, he murmured into her hair. You stall for 20 minutes and then we move. Can you do that? Yes. He kissed her once more, brief and fierce, then stepped back and nodded to the driver. The car pulled away, and Elena watched Dominic disappear into the darkness through the rear window, wondering if that would be the last time she saw him. The warehouse loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of rusted metal and broken windows. Floodlights had been set up around the perimeter, turning the area into something close to daylight. Elena could see guards, men with rifles, dressed in black, scanning the approaches with professional efficiency. The driver stopped exactly 3 blocks away as instructed. Good luck, Mrs. Falcone, he said quietly. Elena climbed out and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, her heart hammering so hard she was sure the guards would hear it. The wire pressed against her sternum, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Dominic could hear everything. He was listening. 2 guards intercepted her at the perimeter, rifles raised. I'm Elena Falcone, she said clearly, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm here to negotiate for Vincent Moreau's release. The guards exchanged glances. One spoke into a radio, his words too quiet for Elena to hear. Then he nodded toward the warehouse entrance. Inside. Hands where we can see them. Elena walked through the door they opened, into a cavernous space lit by industrial work lights. The warehouse had been cleared of most of its original equipment, leaving an open floor broken only by support columns. And in the center, tied to a chair with blood streaking his face, was her father. Vincent looked up as she entered, and Elena saw fear flash across his face before he could hide it. Elena, no! Shut him up, a voice said from the shadows. A man stepped into the light, and Elena recognized him from the surveillance photos Dominic had shown her. Alexei Volkov, the syndicate's second-in-command. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with the cold eyes of someone who'd killed enough people to stop counting. "Mrs. Falcone," Alexei said, his accent thick. "How good of you to join us. Your husband must be very upset." "My husband is exactly where I left him," Elena lied smoothly. "I'm here on my own authority. I have information you want, and I'm willing to trade it for my father's release." Alexei smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Information? What information could you possibly have that's worth a life?" "The supplier network Falcone just acquired," Elena said. 3 companies, complete with shipping schedules, distribution routes, and contact information. Everything you'd need to either steal them back or shut them down entirely. That got his attention. Alexei moved closer, studying her face. "Why would you betray your husband?" "Because he left me at the altar 3 months ago," Elena said, letting real bitterness creep into her voice. "Because he only married me to secure an alliance, and I'm tired of being a strategic asset. You want to hurt him? I'll give you the tools to do it. All I want is my father walking out of here alive." It was a performance. Every word calculated to play on what the Volkovs would expect from a scorned wife. And judging by the interest in Alexei's expression, it was working. "How do I know this information is real?" he asked. "Because I'm the one who negotiated with the suppliers," Elena said. "I have documentation, emails, contracts, everything you need to verify it, but I'm not handing it over until my father is safe." Alexei considered that. "Show me proof. 1 email, 1 contract, something that proves you're not wasting my time." Elena had prepared for this. She pulled out her phone slowly, keeping her movements obvious so no one would think she was reaching for a weapon. She pulled up an email chain with one of the suppliers, real correspondence, but carefully edited to remove anything that would give Dominic an advantage. Alexei read it, his expression sharpening. "This is interesting, but it's not enough." "It's a down payment," Elena countered. "The rest comes when my father and I walk out of here." "You're not walking anywhere," Alexei said flatly. "The moment I let you go, Falcone will retaliate. You're too valuable as leverage." Elena's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression calm. "Then we're at an impasse, because I'm not giving you anything else unless I have guarantees." "The only guarantee you have," Alexei said, pulling a gun from his belt, "is that I'll kill your father right now if you don't cooperate." He aimed the weapon at Vincent's head. Time seemed to slow. Elena heard her father's sharp intake of breath, saw the guard's shifting position, felt her own pulse roaring in her ears. Through the earpiece, she heard Dominic's voice, barely controlled. "Stall! Give us 2 more minutes." "Wait," Elena said, raising her hands. "Wait. I'll give you the next piece. Just don't shoot him." Alexei kept the gun aimed at Vincent. "Talk." Elena pulled up another document on her phone, her hands shaking now. "The shipping schedule for next month. 3 containers coming through the port, contents listed as machine parts, but actually..." The explosion cut her off. It wasn't close, maybe half a mile away, but it was massive. The warehouse shook, dust raining from the rafters. Every guard in the building whirled toward the sound, weapons raised. "What the hell was that?" Alexei demanded into his radio. The response was frantic, overlapping voices reporting vehicles approaching, gunfire, a full assault on their position. "It's Falcone," one of the guards said. "He's hitting us from the north." Alexei's expression went hard. He turned back to Elena, and she saw the moment he realized the truth. "You lying bitch. This was a distraction." He swung the gun toward her. Elena dove behind a support column as the shot rang out, the bullet sparking off metal where her head had been a second before. More gunfire erupted, the guards shooting at shadows, at anything that moved. The warehouse descended into chaos. Through her earpiece, Dominic's voice was sharp and clear. "Elena, west wall, 30 feet from your position. There's a maintenance door. Get to it now." Elena ran, keeping low, using the columns for cover. Bullets whined past her, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Behind her, she heard Alexei shouting orders, trying to organize his men, while the explosions outside continued. The maintenance door was exactly where Dominic said it would be. Elena hit it at full speed, shoving it open and tumbling into darkness. Strong hands caught her. "Got you," Anthony's voice said from the shadows. "Come on, your father's this way." He pulled her through the darkness, and Elena realized they were in the tunnels. The rescue team had already made it in, had already reached Vincent. She could see shapes ahead, flashlights, movement. "Elena!" Vincent's voice, hoarse but alive. She reached him just as Matteo was cutting through the ropes binding him to the chair they'd dragged down here. Vincent collapsed forward, and Elena caught him, her father's weight nearly taking them both down. "I've got you," she gasped. "Dad, I've got you." "You shouldn't have come," Vincent said, but his arms wrapped around her like he'd never let go. "Move," Matteo ordered. "They'll realize we're down here any second." The group ran through the tunnels, Elena half carrying her father, Anthony, and 3 other men providing cover. Behind them, Elena could hear shouts, the sound of pursuit. The Volkovs had figured it out. The tunnels seemed to go on forever, twisting through darkness, their flashlights creating wild shadows on the walls. Elena's lungs burned, her legs screaming, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying. They burst out into the night air through a drainage culvert half a mile from the warehouse. Cars were waiting, engines running. Dominic stood beside the lead vehicle, and when he saw Elena emerge, alive and intact, something in his expression broke. He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with enough force to lift her off her feet. "You're alive," he said against her hair, and she could hear the tremor in his voice. "You're alive." "I promised I'd come back," Elena managed, even though her whole body was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Dominic set her down but kept his hands on her face, his eyes searching hers like he was checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm fine," Elena assured him. "Dominic, I'm fine." But she could see he didn't believe her, could see the fear that had been eating at him for the last 20 minutes written in every line of his face. "Get them out of here," he ordered Anthony. "Take Vincent to the safe house. Get him medical attention. Elena goes with him." "What about you?" Elena asked, suddenly realizing Dominic wasn't planning to come with them. His expression went cold, distant. The man who'd held her seconds ago disappeared behind the mask of the crime boss. "I have business to finish." "Dominic." "They took what was mine," he said quietly, and there was something terrifying in his voice. "They put their hands on you, threatened to kill you. That requires a response." Elena understood what he wasn't saying. He was going back to the warehouse. He was going to make the Volkovs pay for this in blood. "Don't," she said, gripping his arm. "Don't go back there. You got us out, that's enough." "It's not enough," Dominic interrupted. "It will never be enough. They need to understand that you are untouchable, that even thinking about harming you is a death sentence." He kissed her forehead, gentle and final. "Anthony will keep you safe. I'll be back by morning." Then he was gone, climbing into a different car with Matteo and 4 other men, the vehicle disappearing into the night before Elena could stop him. Anthony touched her elbow gently. "Mrs. Falcone, we need to go." Elena let him guide her into the car beside her father. As they pulled away, she looked back at the warehouse in the distance. Smoke was rising from multiple points, flames licking at the sky. The distraction had turned into something bigger, something that looked more like war than rescue. And somewhere in that chaos, Dominic was hunting the men who'd taken her. Vincent was quiet beside her, his breathing labored. Elena held his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers. He was in shock, probably hurt worse than he was admitting. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing you've ever done," Vincent said finally, his voice rough. "I learned from the best," Elena replied. He squeezed her hand. "I misjudged him. Your husband. I thought he was just using you for the alliance, but the way he looked when you walked out of those tunnels." Vincent shook his head. "That man loves you, Elena. Really loves you." Elena stared out the window at the Chicago night passing by. "I know." "Do you love him back?" The question hung in the air. Elena thought about the last 2 weeks, the partnership they'd built, the vulnerability Dominic had shown her. She thought about his confession in the bedroom, his terror in the study, the way he'd held her like she was the only thing keeping him human. "I think I'm starting to," she admitted quietly. The safe house was a nondescript building in Lincoln Park, close enough to look residential, but fortified enough to withstand a siege. A doctor was waiting when they arrived, immediately checking Vincent's injuries. Broken ribs, a concussion, extensive bruising. Bad, but survivable. Natalie arrived 20 minutes later, throwing herself at Elena with enough force to nearly knock them both over. "You're insane," Natalie sobbed into Elena's shoulder. "You're absolutely insane." "I got him back," Elena said, holding her sister tight. "You almost got yourself killed." "But I didn't." They stayed like that for a long moment. Two sisters who'd survived another day in a world that was constantly trying to destroy them. The hours crawled by. Elena sat with her father while he slept, watching his chest rise and fall, reassuring herself he was alive. Anthony checked in periodically, reporting that Dominic was fine. The situation was under control. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But Elena could read between the lines. The Volkovs were being systematically eliminated, not just the men at the warehouse, but the entire organization. Dominic was dismantling them piece by piece, sending a message that would echo through Chicago's underworld for years. Don't touch what belongs to Dominic Falcone. Dawn was breaking when Dominic finally walked through the safe house door. He was covered in blood, none of it his, Elena realized with a mixture of relief and horror. His expression was empty, exhausted, the face of a man who'd done necessary violence and paid for it in pieces of his soul. Elena stood from her chair beside her father's bed, crossed to Dominic, put her hands on his chest, and felt his heart hammering beneath her palms. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "It's done," Dominic confirmed. "The Volkovs are finished. The ones who survived will be too afraid to ever come near our family again." Our family. The word settled over Elena like a benediction. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let's get you cleaned up." She led him to one of the safe house bathrooms, started the shower, helped him out of his ruined clothes. Dominic stood under the hot water and let Elena wash the blood away, his eyes closed, his expression haunted. "I killed 6 men tonight," he said finally. "With my own hands, because they threatened you." Elena's hands stilled on his shoulders. "Dominic, I'm not sorry," he continued, opening his eyes to look at her. "I'd do it again. I'd kill 100 men if it meant keeping you safe. Does that make me a monster?" Elena thought about the question carefully. In her old life, the answer would have been yes, but she wasn't that sheltered girl anymore. She'd walked into a den of killers to save her father. She'd lied and manipulated and risked everything. She'd become part of this world in ways she never imagined. "It makes you mine," she said finally. "And I'm yours. That's all that matters." Dominic pulled her into the shower with him, fully clothed, and kissed her with the desperation of a man who'd thought he'd lost everything. When they finally broke apart, both soaking wet, Elena saw tears mixing with the water on his face. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Elena, I can't." "You won't," she promised. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood under the water until it ran cold, holding each other like they could anchor themselves against the chaos of their world through sheer force of will. And maybe they could. Maybe that's what love was in this life. Two people choosing each other despite the violence, despite the fear, despite everything that said they should run. Choosing to stay and build something beautiful in the wreckage. The aftermath of the Volkov elimination rippled through Chicago's underworld like an earthquake. Within 48 hours, every major family in the city knew what had happened. How Dominic Falcone had decimated an entire syndicate in a single night. How he'd sent a message written in blood that his wife was untouchable. The whispers that had followed Elena since the rejected wedding changed tenor overnight. No longer was she the woman Dominic had found lacking. Now she was the woman he'd gone to war for. Elena spent those first 2 days at the safe house with her father, watching him heal, fielding calls from family members who suddenly remembered she existed. Her uncle Marcus called to express his relief at Vincent's rescue. Distant cousins she hadn't heard from in months reached out with congratulations on her marriage. Even the women who'd whispered cruelest after the cathedral disaster sent flowers and cards, their messages dripping with newfound respect. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt hollow. "They only care because I'm valuable now," Elena said to Natalie on the 3rd morning, watching another bouquet arrive through the safe house's reinforced windows. Because Dominic proved I'm worth protecting. Natalie was curled up in the armchair across from her, dark circles under her eyes from nights spent sleeping in the safe house. Isn't that what you wanted? To have your reputation restored? I wanted to matter on my own terms, Elena said quietly. Not because of what my husband will do to people who hurt me. Maybe it's not about them, Natalie offered. Maybe it's about him showing you that you matter to him, that he meant what he said about not being able to lose you. Elena considered that. Dominic had been at the estate for the last 3 days, managing the fallout, meeting with other families to reinforce the new power structure. But he called every few hours, his voice tight with barely controlled worry, until he heard Elena confirm she was safe. At night, he returned to the safe house instead of sleeping in his own bed, crawling in beside Elena and holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Vincent was well enough to travel by the 4th day. The doctor cleared him for discharge with instructions for rest and follow-up appointments. Anthony arranged the transport back to the Moreau estate, a convoy of 3 vehicles with enough security to move ahead of state. "You're coming home," Vincent said to Elena as they prepared to leave. It wasn't a question. Elena glanced at Dominic, who'd arrived that morning to oversee the transport. Her husband stood by the window, his expression unreadable as he watched the street below. "Actually," Elena said carefully, "I'm going back to the south side with Dominic. That's where I live now." Vincent's expression tightened. "Elena, you've been through a trauma. You should be with family." "She is with family," Dominic interrupted, turning from the window. "She's with her husband, unless you're suggesting our marriage isn't legitimate?" The challenge hung in the air. Vincent met Dominic's gaze and something passed between them, an understanding, maybe, or an acknowledgement of the shift in power dynamics. "Of course not," Vincent said finally. "I just want what's best for my daughter." "So do I," Dominic said quietly. "That's something we finally agree on." The drive back to the estate was quiet. Dominic sat beside Elena in the back seat, his hand covering hers on the leather seat between them. She could feel the tension in his grip, the way his thumb traced absent patterns on her skin, like he was reassuring himself she was real. "Talk to me," Elena said softly. "What's going on in your head?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with exhaustion. "I keep seeing it. You walking into that warehouse. The gun aimed at you. All the ways it could have gone wrong." "But it didn't go wrong," Elena reminded him. "We got my father out. We survived." "This time," Dominic said, "but there will be other threats, Elena. Other people who see you as a weakness they can exploit. And I don't know if I can—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I don't know if I can survive losing you. That terrifies me more than any enemy." Elena turned in her seat to face him fully. "You're not going to lose me. But Dominic, you can't protect me from everything. This is our world. Danger is part of it." "I know that intellectually," Dominic admitted. "But knowing it and accepting it are different things." The car pulled through the estate gates, and Elena saw home with new eyes. The fortress that had seemed so imposing 3 weeks ago now felt like sanctuary, a place where she and Dominic could build something real, away from the eyes of people who only saw them as strategic assets. Mrs. Chen greeted them at the door with her usual efficiency, though Elena caught the flash of relief in the older woman's expression. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Falcone. I've prepared lunch if you're hungry, and your suite is ready." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Elena said warmly. "Lunch sounds perfect." They ate in the dining room, just the two of them at the massive table. Dominic picked at his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. Elena recognized the signs of a man trying to process trauma he didn't know how to articulate. "I need to tell you something," Dominic said finally, setting down his fork, "about why I really walked away from the cathedral wedding." Elena's heart stuttered. "You already told me. You were afraid of being vulnerable." "That's true, but it's not complete." Dominic stood, pacing to the windows. "My father built this organization on fear and control. He taught me that caring about anything made you weak, that love was a weapon your enemies would use to destroy you. And for years I believed him." "What changed?" Elena asked. "You," Dominic said simply. When I met you at that gala 6 months before the wedding, when we talked for all of 5 minutes about Russian literature and international trade policy, I knew. I knew you were dangerous to everything I'd built my life around. So I tried to keep my distance during the engagement, kept it professional, strategic, told myself it was just an alliance. He turned back to face her. But when I stood at that altar and looked at you, really looked at you, I realized I was in love with you, completely, devastatingly in love. And I panicked, because my father was right. Loving you did make me weak. It made me willing to burn down my entire empire if it meant keeping you safe. It made me human in a world where being human gets you killed. Elena crossed to him, her hands finding his. Your father was wrong. Love doesn't make you weak. It makes you fight harder, think smarter, care about more than just power. I'm starting to understand that, Dominic said. But Elena, I need you to know. The man I became after I walked away from you, the man who spent 3 months drowning in regret. That's who I really am. Not the controlled, emotionless boss everyone sees. With you, I'm just human, Elena finished, flawed and afraid and trying to do better. Yes, Dominic breathed. Is that enough? Can you love someone who's still figuring out how not to be a monster? Elena stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sure. I already do. The words landed between them like a confession and a promise. Dominic's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This marriage, this partnership, this messy, complicated love they were building, it was all real. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent in strategy meetings. Elena now a permanent fixture at the table as they restructured the organization in the wake of the Volkov elimination. She discovered she had a talent for negotiation, for finding solutions that didn't require violence. The men who'd been skeptical of her at first began seeking her input, recognizing that her perspective often prevented costly mistakes. Afternoons, Elena started working on something that had been growing in her mind since the kidnapping. She'd seen firsthand how the criminal world destroyed families, how violence cascaded through generations. She wanted to create something different, a foundation that helped women and children caught in the crossfire of gang wars, people who needed a way out but had nowhere to turn. She pitched the idea to Dominic one evening in his study, nervous despite knowing he'd be supportive. It's brilliant, Dominic said immediately, looking up from the proposal she'd drafted. And it's exactly the kind of legitimacy we need. A Falcone Foundation doing real good in the community. It changes the narrative. I don't want to do it for the narrative, Elena clarified. I want to do it because it matters. Because I've been powerless and I know how that feels. I want to give people options I never had. Dominic stood, rounding the desk to pull her close. Then we'll do it. Whatever resources you need, whatever support, it's yours. Just like that? Elena asked. No concerns about the cost, the exposure? Just like that, Dominic confirmed. Elena, you've transformed how this organization operates in 2 weeks. You've made us smarter, more strategic, more human. If you want to build something that actually helps people, I'm not going to stand in your way. I'm going to help you build it. The foundation launched a month later, quietly at first, working with existing shelters and advocacy groups. Elena threw herself into the work, discovering a sense of purpose she'd never found in the strategic marriages and social climbing of her old life. She was making a real difference, and it felt like redemption for all the years she'd spent being decorative. Natalie joined her as the foundation's first employee, bringing her business degree and fierce compassion to the work. Together, the sisters built something that mattered, something that would outlast the violence of the world they'd been born into. But not everything was smooth. 3 months after the Volkov elimination, Elena discovered something that threatened to shatter the fragile peace they'd built. She was in Dominic's study late one night, looking for a file he'd mentioned, when she found the folder tucked in the back of his desk drawer. It was labeled with a single word, contingencies. Elena knew she shouldn't open it, knew that Dominic's private files were his business, but something about the label made her uneasy, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. Inside were documents outlining plans for various scenarios: rival family attacks, law enforcement investigations, internal coups, standard contingency planning for a criminal organization. But at the bottom of the stack was a file that made Elena's blood run cold. It was a plan for what to do if Elena was killed. Not just practical matters like funeral arrangements and estate management, but a detailed strategy for how Dominic would handle the emotional fallout, including a recommendation from his therapist. Elena hadn't known he was seeing a therapist, that he should consider stepping down from leadership if he became emotionally compromised by her death. The implication was clear. Dominic's own people believed losing her would break him so completely he'd be unfit to lead. Elena was still staring at the document when Dominic walked in. "Elena?" He saw the folder in her hands, and his expression closed off. "You shouldn't be reading that." "Why do you have a plan for if I die?" Elena asked, her voice shaking. "Why are your advisors recommending you abdicate if something happens to me?" Dominic crossed to her slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile. "Because they're not wrong. Elena, if you died, I don't know if I could come back from that. The night you were in that warehouse, when I thought I might lose you, I became someone I didn't recognize, someone who would have burned the entire city down for revenge." "That's not healthy," Elena said, though her heart was breaking at the raw honesty in his voice. "Dominic, you can't make me responsible for your entire emotional stability. That's too much weight for any person to carry." "I know," Dominic said quietly. "That's why I'm working with Dr. Ramirez, trying to understand how to love you without losing myself completely in that love." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "It's harder than any business strategy I've ever implemented." Elena set the folder down, moved to him. "I'm scared too. I'm scared that this world will destroy us, that we're building something beautiful in a foundation of violence, and it can't possibly last. But Dominic, we can't live in fear of losing each other. We have to trust that we're stronger together." "What if we're not?" Dominic asked. "What if loving you is the thing that finally breaks me?" "Then we'll put the pieces back together," Elena said firmly. "Together. That's what partnership means. You don't get to protect me by planning for my death. You protect me by living with me, building with me, trusting that we can handle whatever comes." Dominic pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "I don't know how to not be afraid of losing you." "Then be afraid," Elena said. "But don't let that fear control you. Don't let it make you pull away from what we're building." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the study. Finally, Dominic pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I need to tell you something else," he said. "Something I should have told you months ago." Elena's stomach tightened. "What?" "There's a traitor in the organization," Dominic said quietly. "Someone who's been feeding information to our competitors, undermining our operations. I've known for 6 weeks, but I haven't been able to identify them. And I'm worried that when I do, when we have to deal with them, it's going to get ugly." Elena processed that. "Does this person know about me? About the foundation?" "Almost certainly," Dominic said. "Elena, I need you to increase your security. No more going out without guards. No more taking meetings alone." "I'm not going to live in a cage," Elena protested. "I'm not asking you to," Dominic said. "I'm asking you to be smart. This traitor has already cost us 3 shipments and nearly got Anthony killed last month. They're dangerous, and they're close enough to know our vulnerabilities." "Then we find them," Elena said. "Together. What do we know?" Over the next week, Elena and Dominic worked together to unravel the conspiracy. Elena's analytical mind proved invaluable, spotting patterns in the leaked information that pointed to someone with access to both family operations and personal details. She cross-referenced attendance at meetings, compared timelines of leaks with staff schedules, built a profile of who the traitor had to be. It was Anthony who finally confirmed their suspicions. He came to the estate late one night, his expression grim. "It's Michael Cortez," he said without preamble. "Your head of security. I caught him on the phone with someone from the Catalano family discussing our shipment routes for next month." Dominic's expression went cold, dangerous. "You're certain?" "Recorded the whole conversation," Anthony confirmed, handing over his phone. "He's been playing both sides for at least 8 months, maybe longer." Elena watched Dominic listen to the recording, saw the moment his control fractured. Michael Cortez had been with the Falcone organization for 12 years. He'd been trusted, valued, given access to everything, and he'd betrayed that trust for money. "Where is he now?" Dominic asked, his voice empty. "Waiting in the East Wing," Anthony said. "Under guard. He doesn't know we're onto him yet." Dominic stood. "Good. Elena, stay here." "No," Elena said immediately. "If we're partners, I'm part of this." "This isn't a negotiation," Dominic said. "This is going to be ugly, and I don't want you to see—" "See what? See you be the ruthless crime boss everyone thinks you are?" Elena challenged. "Dominic, I know who you are. All of you. I'm not going to hide from the parts that are difficult." Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but you stay behind me. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. No arguments." "Deal." Michael Cortez was sitting in a chair in one of the estate's conference rooms, flanked by 2 guards. He looked nervous but not panicked, clearly hoping his cover was still intact. He stood when Dominic and Elena entered. "Boss, Mrs. Falcone, what's this about?" "Sit down, Michael," Dominic said quietly. Something in his tone made Michael's face go pale. He sat. Dominic placed Anthony's phone on the table, pressed play. Michael's voice filled the room, discussing shipment routes, security protocols, personal information about Dominic and Elena. By the time the recording ended, Michael was shaking. "I can explain," he started. "Don't," Dominic interrupted. "Don't insult us both by lying. You've been selling information to the Catalanos for months. You've endangered lives, cost us millions, and betrayed every oath you swore when you joined this family." Michael's face crumpled. "They threatened my daughter, said they'd kill her if I didn't cooperate. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice," Elena said, her voice cutting through his excuses. "You could have come to us, told us about the threat. We would have protected your daughter. Instead, you chose to endanger everyone else's families to save your own." "Elena's right," Dominic said. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Michael's eyes widened with fear. "Dom, please. I'll do anything." "It's too late for anything," Dominic said. "You're done. The question is whether you walk away with your life or not." The room went silent. Elena could see Michael calculating, trying to find an angle that would save him. "I want immunity," Michael said finally. "Complete immunity, protection for my family, and $5 million. In exchange, I'll give you everything. Names of everyone in the Catalano organization who knew, details of every leak, everything I know about their operations." Dominic looked at Elena. She could see the question in his eyes. "What do you think?" Elena considered it carefully. Michael was a traitor, yes, but he was also a resource, and his daughter was innocent in all of this. "Counter offer," Elena said. "You get immunity and protection for your family. No money. And you don't walk away, you work for us, publicly, feeding the Catalanos false information that we control. You become our weapon against them instead of theirs against us." Michael blinked. "You want me to be a double agent?" "I want you to earn your redemption," Elena said. "You betrayed us to protect your daughter. Fine. Now protect her by helping us destroy the people who threatened her. Prove that your loyalty can be bought back with more than just mercy." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "And if he betrays us again?" "Then I'll kill him myself," Elena said calmly, meeting Michael's eyes. "No second chances, no excuses. You get one opportunity to prove you deserve to live. Don't waste it." Michael stared at her, clearly reassessing the woman he'd thought was just a decorative wife. "You're serious?" "Completely," Elena confirmed. He looked at Dominic, who nodded slowly. "What my wife said. You work for us now, Michael, completely and without reservation. And if you ever think about betraying us again, remember that mercy only comes once." The deal was struck. Michael Cortez became their inside weapon against the Catalano family, feeding them false information that cost them 3 major operations over the next 2 months. His daughter was moved to a secure location with her mother, protected by Falcone soldiers, who made sure the Catalanos could never threaten her again. And Elena discovered something about herself in that conference room. She was capable of ruthlessness when necessary. She could make the hard decisions, balance mercy with strategy, be exactly the kind of partner Dominic needed to navigate their dangerous world. 6 months after the Volkov elimination, Elena stood in front of a mirror in the estate's master bedroom, adjusting the simple black dress she'd chosen for the foundation's first major fundraiser. The event would be attended by Chicago's legitimate elite, business people, politicians, philanthropists who had no idea the woman hosting the charity gala was married to one of the city's most powerful crime bosses. Dominic came up behind her, his hands settling on her waist. "You look beautiful." "I look nervous," Elena corrected, though she leaned back into his touch. "You're going to be brilliant," Dominic assured her, "just like you are at everything else." Elena turned in his arms, studying the man she'd married. He looked different than he had 7 months ago at their disastrous cathedral wedding. The hard edges were still there, but something had softened. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, let himself be vulnerable in ways that terrified and freed him in equal measure. "Are you happy?" she asked suddenly. Dominic considered the question seriously. "I'm terrified most of the time, worried something will happen to you, that I'll fail you again, that this peace we've built is too fragile to last. But yes, underneath all that fear, I'm happy. Are you?" Elena thought about the question. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken woman whose life had been destroyed by public humiliation. Now she ran a foundation that was making real change. She was a respected voice in a criminal organization, and she was married to a man who loved her with a devastating intensity. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy, and I'm proud of us, of what we've built." "We're not done building," Dominic reminded her. "There will be more challenges, more threats." "I know," Elena interrupted, "but we'll face them together, that's the point." The fundraiser was a success beyond Elena's hopes. They raised over $2 million for the foundation, secured commitments from major donors, and established the Falcone name as a force for positive change in Chicago. Elena moved through the crowd with confidence, telling stories about the families they'd helped, the women who'd found safety through their programs, the children who'd escaped cycles of violence. She saw her father in the crowd, looking proud in a way he never had when she was just his decorative daughter, saw Natalie charming a table of wealthy donors, saw Dominic watching her from across the room with an expression that made her heart skip. When she finally made it over to him, Dominic pulled her into a quiet corner. "I need to tell you something," he said. Elena's stomach tightened. Those words never preceded good news. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Dominic said quickly. "Actually, something's very right. Elena, you've changed everything. This organization, this family, me, we're all better because of you, and I need you to know that walking away from you at that altar was the worst mistake of my life. But marrying you 3 months later was the best decision I've ever made." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Dominic." "I'm not finished," he interrupted gently. "I know our marriage started as strategy, an alliance to survive a war, but it's become so much more than that. You're not just my wife, you're my partner, my conscience, my reason for being better than I was. And I wanted you to know, in front of all these people who respect what you've built, that I love you, completely, devastatingly, forever." The confession hung between them, witnessed by 200 people who didn't know they were overhearing a moment of transformation. "I love you too," Elena whispered, "even when you're impossible and overprotective and terrified of your own feelings. I love you." Dominic kissed her then, in front of Chicago's elite, claiming her not as a strategic asset, but as the woman who'd saved him from the cold, controlled life he'd been living. When they pulled apart, the room had gone quiet. People were watching, clearly moved by the obvious love between them. Vincent approached, his expression softer than Elena had ever seen it. That was quite a declaration. "It was the truth," Dominic said simply, his arm around Elena's waist. "I can see that," Vincent said. He looked at Elena. "I was wrong about you, about this marriage. I thought you needed protection, guidance, someone to make decisions for you. But you've become someone I barely recognize, in the best possible way. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." "I learned from watching you survive," Elena said, "and I learned from Dominic that strength doesn't mean being emotionless. It means being vulnerable enough to care about the right things." Vincent nodded slowly. "Then I'm proud of you, both of you, for building something real in a world that usually destroys real things." The fundraiser continued for hours, a celebration not just of the foundation, but of everything Elena and Dominic had survived to get here. When it finally ended, they returned to the estate exhausted and exhilarated. Elena kicked off her heels in the bedroom, collapsing onto the bed with a satisfied sigh. We did it. You did it, Dominic corrected, sitting beside her. This was all you, Elena. It was us, she insisted. Everything we've built, the foundation, the peace with the other families, the life we're living, it's all us. Together. Dominic laid down beside her, pulling her close. Do you ever think about that day at the cathedral? Wonder what would have happened if I'd gone through with it? Sometimes, Elena admitted. But I think we needed those 3 months. Needed the pain and the separation to understand what we were risking. If you'd married me that day, we would have been strangers playing roles. Now we're actually partners. Partners who love each other, Dominic added. Yes, Elena smiled. That too. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd found redemption in each other's arms. 5 years later, Elena stood in the Foundation's new headquarters building, a gleaming structure in downtown Chicago funded by donations and legitimate Falcone business investments. The organization had expanded beyond her wildest dreams, operating shelters in 4 cities, employing dozens of social workers and advocates, changing hundreds of lives every year. Dominic found her in her office, their 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, asleep against his shoulder. The sight of them together, this dangerous man cradling their child with infinite gentleness, still took Elena's breath away. She fell asleep in the car, Dominic said quietly. Didn't want to wake her. Elena crossed to them, running her hand over Sophia's dark curls. She's perfect. She's exhausting, Dominic corrected with a smile. She has your stubbornness and my need for control. It's a terrifying combination. She's going to change the world, Elena said confidently, just like her parents did. Dominic shifted Sophia carefully, freeing one arm to pull Elena close. We did change things, didn't we? Elena looked around her office, at the photos on the walls of families they'd helped, at the awards the foundation had won, at the evidence of real change they'd created. Then she looked at Dominic, at the man who'd rejected her, and then fought for her and ultimately transformed himself to be worthy of her love. We changed everything, she confirmed. The criminal empire Dominic ran was still there, still powerful. But it operated differently now, with Elena's influence tempering the violence, finding strategic solutions that didn't require bloodshed. The Falcone name meant something new in Chicago, not just fear, but respect, not just power, but responsibility. And at the center of it all was a marriage that had started in rejection and survived war and betrayal and fear to become something unbreakable. I need to tell you something, Elena said, echoing Dominic's words from the fundraiser 5 years earlier. Dominic's expression sharpened with concern. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Elena said, pulling his free hand to her stomach. Actually, something's very right. We're going to have another baby. Dominic's eyes widened, his hand spreading across her still flat belly. Elena, I know we said we'd wait, she interrupted, but apparently life had other plans. Are you happy? Instead of answering, Dominic kissed her with the kind of desperate joy that still surprised her after 5 years. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. I'm terrified, Dominic admitted. Terrified something will happen to you, to Sophia, to this new baby. Terrified I'll fail at being the father they deserve. You won't, Elena promised, because you're not doing it alone. We're in this together, always. Sophia stirred against Dominic's shoulder, her eyes opening sleepily. Mama? I'm here, baby, Elena said, taking her daughter's small hand. Dada too, Sophia confirmed, her other hand patting Dominic's chest. Always, Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. Dada's always here. They stood like that in Elena's office. Dominic, Elena, and Sophia, with the promise of another child growing between them. And Elena thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago. The sheltered girl standing at an altar, waiting for a groom who didn't come. That woman had been broken by rejection. But the woman she'd become had been forged in that breaking. She'd learned to be strategic, ruthless when necessary, compassionate when possible. She'd learned that love wasn't weakness, but the most powerful weapon in her arsenal. She'd learned that partnership meant showing up every day and choosing each other despite the fear. And she'd learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something beautiful from the wreckage. Dominic had learned too. He'd learned that the control he'd prized so highly was just fear in disguise. That being vulnerable didn't make him weak, it made him human. That love didn't destroy his power, it refined it into something worth having. Together, they'd rewritten the rules of their world. They'd proven that a mafia boss could love his wife more than power, that a rejected bride could become a force for change, that partnership could transform violence into purpose. The man who'd feared weakness had been redeemed by the woman who refused to be broken. And what began as rejection ended in transformation. Not because power changed love, but because love reshaped power into something worthy of the people who wielded it. Years from now, when people told the story of Elena and Dominic Falcone, they would talk about the dramatic rescue, the war with the Volkovs, the foundation that changed countless lives. But Elena knew the real story was quieter, more intimate. It was the story of two broken people who chose to heal each other, who built a life from the wreckage of a rejected wedding and a dangerous world, who proved that love, real, messy, terrifying love, was stronger than any empire. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Dominic carried Sophia toward the door, Elena following close behind, her hand resting on the promise of new life growing inside her. As they left the office, stepping into the Chicago evening together, Elena looked back one last time at the evidence of everything they'd built. Then she looked forward toward the life they were still creating, toward the future that stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and joy and the messy, beautiful work of loving each other completely. She'd been rejected at an altar 7 years ago, but she'd found redemption in the arms of the man who'd walked away, and together they'd built something that would last forever.